Our data at Microsoft shows our customers, which also include critical infrastructure sectors from the health sector, powering our homes, water, finance, education. Our customers see 600 million cyber criminal and nation-state attacks per day. Now, where are we heading?
Patricia has been recognized as one of Washington, D.C.'s 500 most influential people shaping policy in 2024. Patricia is the Director of Cybersecurity and Emerging Tech Policy at Microsoft, where she leads global efforts to shape cybersecurity policies and safeguard cyberspace. She collaborates with government, industry partners, and academia to strengthen the security and resilience of cyberspace. In today's chat, we will discuss Patricia's leadership, the public policy landscape, and how AI is reshaping cybersecurity.
AI is a force multiplier. Gen AI and the agentic AI's ability to be able to add that force multiplier to scale and become faster and add efficiency, perhaps that asymmetric advantage for the cyber defender may be achieved.
Patricia, Ephraim, aka, welcome to AI Cyber Magazine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
By the way, has anyone ever told you really look like Alicia Keys?
Yes, in my teenage years and also at RSA last year.
Oh my
I
days.
was in line at RSA and folks were like, "Hey, Alicia Keys, why are you standing in line with us?" And some young cybersecurity professionals, I think from Latin America, really did not believe that I was not Alicia Keys. And so they took pictures with me to take home with them. So that was pretty funny.
And you know what the coincidence really was, and why most of them would have thought that as well? It was Alicia Keys was actually playing at RSA, and did play at RSA last year.
Oh, but that's why. But that's why. So it was actually in line for her concert. I was in line for her concert, and so people were like, "Yo, A Keys." I mean, they knew I wasn't Alicia Keys, but right. It was a lot of jokes. And recently I've been getting Tyler. So I really don't know what people are seeing, but I welcome the compliments.
It's interesting. But jokes aside, you're right at the crossroads of cybersecurity policy and emerging tech at Microsoft. Was there a defining moment in your career that made you dive headfirst into public policy?
There was not a defining moment in my career that made me pivot into cybersecurity and eventually cybersecurity at the intersection of public policy. I've always been drawn to forward-looking work. My first role after I graduated college, this was back in 2005, I worked for the Department of Energy on initiatives to modernize the North American electric grid by 2030. And we are sitting here and it's 2025 now. So if that gives you a flavor of what I've always been attracted to. And then at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I explored cloud computing for industrial control systems. I worked in carbon markets about 10, 15 years ago when that's still a topic that is very relevant today as it relates to sustainability. And today I work in cybersecurity at the intersection of AI and obviously the promise of AI to improve the human condition is really the driving force behind my interest in AI and the promises that it has for revolutionizing cybersecurity industry and what it can do for the cyber defender is very inspiring.
So Patricia, you've shared a lot about your background and what you've been doing so far. Why is your work so important?
A lot of the critical needs we have are based on critical infrastructure sectors like the health sector, the power sector, finance sector, water sector, and the list goes on. Our data at Microsoft shows that our customers, which also include critical infrastructure sectors, our customers see 600 million cyber criminal and nation-state attacks per day. No, I didn't misspeak. I actually said 600 million, more than 600 million a day. So when you think about the fact that we are all digitally connected, the digital infrastructure underpinning all of these critical needs that we have for the nation, the economic security of the nation, public health and safety, national security are all interconnected. This system needs to stay secure and resilient. And so the work that we do is partnering with stakeholders worldwide, from governments to civil society, academia, industry, critical infrastructure, small businesses, nonprofits. We partner with global multi-stakeholders to advance policies that can keep our digital infrastructure, our cyberspace secure and resilient.
It's very interesting that you put it that way because I've always held the opinion that cybersecurity is not exactly just about protecting technology. It's also about protecting civilization. And that's what you're basically saying as well, because infrastructure we use every day is really just riding on technology and then we protect all of that infrastructure. So fantastic work and fantastic way of putting that there. How are you and your team collaborating with the broader tech community and even governments to shape policy that addresses AI driven cyber challenges?
Great question. So we do it in various forms. As you already said, through the tech community, we work with like-minded companies in tech, as well as like-minded companies in critical infrastructure sectors, which I just, referenced in my earlier response. We work in partnership to advance research. We work in partnership to have open dialogue and try to come up with solutions to very complex questions around security and resilience. We also partner with governments worldwide and globally, and we try to be a good partner to answer some of these complex issues. So I'll give you an example. Last year, Microsoft partnered with CISA, which is the United States Cyber Defense Agency, to conduct the first federal AI cybersecurity tabletop exercise. It was a series of tabletop exercises. There was a lot of tech at the table as well. We had critical infrastructure partners from the finance sector, and we also had international government participation. And the end goal was to put out a guidance that shows, should there be an AI cybersecurity incident, what will collaboration across all the multi-stakeholders involved look like? Not only do we work with, government and corporations or businesses and critical infrastructure, we also work with academia, civil society, and think tanks. So another example is Microsoft partnered with Georgetown University CSET to conduct a 2-day workshop to have an open conversation about what AI means in what critical infrastructure means in the age of AI. And that report was published. So happy for you to take a look at that. We have something that we partnered with the United Nations Institute on Disarmament Research, UNIDER, and started an initiative called RAISE, which was put together to advance the AI conversation in the national security space. So there's a lot of work that we do across many different partners. I hope that just gives you a small flavor into some of the work and how we partner and collaborate to try to answer some of these very complex questions and, most importantly, move the needle on cybersecurity.
I have a lot of questions to ask you about race, but I think I'm going to hold that thought and come back to it later in the conversation. But I really want you to speak to us about how governments around the world, from what you've seen, are approaching the AI security challenge. If you could share maybe a couple of approaches, that would help us understand the different flavors of approaches and maybe also share with us which one you believe is the most effective policy from all of the observations you've had around the world.
Right, great question. So I will first of all start by saying it is a very dynamic space. It is changing so quickly, and there have been a lot of new developments in the last 2 weeks. But what I'll do is I'll just lay the ground and give you and paint a picture of what we've been seeing so far in the last 12 months. Governments worldwide have recognized that AI is here and AI is here to stay. They have recognized the benefits as well as the risks and are looking for ways to be a part of this innovation and as this technology continues to proliferate, and also how to mitigate the risks based on their own national interest. what we've seen, for example, I'll use examples like the US, EU, and China so far, is that their regulatory approaches to AI safety and security are reflective of the core values of the government. So in the US, more market-driven, incentivizing innovation, as well as some regulatory directives for the federal government to do research and different various forms of initiatives for safety and security. In the EU, they passed the EU AI Act, which is considered the first comprehensive AI legislation, and that was more focused on human rights. And in China, more states-driven, which is reflective of the government there. There are other countries that have regulatory approaches. I would say the UK was somewhat similar to the US, but a lot has changed. January 20th, President Trump became the president, and one of his first actions actually was to rescind the AI executive order from the previous administration, amongst other executive orders. And the thinking behind this is to rescind policies that they believe present barriers to AI innovation. And the plan here is the Trump administration is reviewing policies, and they are looking to put together an AI action plan that will map out policies to enhance the United States AI dominance, as well as reduce or prevent some of these barriers to AI innovation. Also, the AI summit happened in Paris this month, and some changes there as well as the Munich Security Conference that also happened around the same time. I'm sure you've seen the news. A lot of things happened there, but in the AI security space, or should I say in the AI space, we saw a transition, or rather a shift from a focus from AI safety to AI security. So we saw nations not wanting to sign the AI declarations. And also we've seen, for example, the UK AI Safety Institute, I think they've dropped the safety and now kept only the security in the name. So they've renamed pretty much to only say UK AI Security Institute, right? Here in the United States, there are rumors we've seen in the news recently that the AI Safety Institute may be gutted. We don't know for sure. We probably will know by the time this magazine is published. So we are seeing that switch. And then the last sort of micro trend that I want to flag for you is also the regulatory divergence. So based on how I described what the different governments have been doing around AI regulatory approaches, there was a divergence that I would say was happening there, but now it's unclear where things are going to go, but there is a flavor of deregulation at the moment that we sense, but it is a very dynamic space. Just keep on watching and we'll learn more.
Thank you so much for sharing this micro trend, but I just want to double down on something you said. I'm beginning to think the international community or the industry as a whole, technology industry as a whole, sees safety as something different from security, correct? If there's a difference, can you share with us what that difference is?
That's a very, very good question. And I think depending on who you talk to, folks may explain it in different ways. This is actually a topic that has been extensively discussed, like what the differences between AI safety and security are. The school of thought has been that some parts of security are encompassed in AI safety, but to my understanding and the way we've treated it as Microsoft is that with AI safety, that's where you have a lot of the work around mitigating bias, mitigating ethical issues, and mitigating risks to human physical health and mental health as well. The security work at Microsoft, we've looked at it as the security of the AI system and AI infrastructure, as well as using AI for cybersecurity. So that's the defense piece, and also what the risks AI poses to the cybersecurity or security threat landscape as a whole. So we've typically looked at it through those three lenses. My read of what's happening right now, based on this shift from safety to security, is really surrounding that piece around biases and ethics. there seems to be a school of thought that's growing to say that those areas should not be areas that hinder AI innovation, right? And security, as far as I'm concerned, should underpin every government's agenda. What's the point of building out an AI infrastructure for your country if an adversary can just easily just come in and steal your models, right? So I think there has been consensus because even in the past, in the way I had explained to you what's been happening with the regulatory approaches, even if there was a divergence in how they were doing it, there was an underlying consensus, I think, that security is important. I think what we're seeing right now is that importance is now being put front and center. And I think there's also an interplay with regulation and deregulation here because the security side of things is more mature, so to speak, than AI safety in terms of the new areas that came in as a part of the emergence of Gen AI. I believe that by focusing or shifting that focus to security, it can tie in quite nicely with this deregulation trend that we're seeing. But again, all speculation. We'll have to watch and see.
We're watching for sure. But you've spoken about a lot of AI efforts across the world. So my next question is more about what you're seeing across major global AI security initiatives, like the Frontier Model Forum that we spoke about before you came on camera that Microsoft is part of, or even the DAPA AI Cyber Challenge. In your view, are these truly collaborative initiatives or more like a contest for influence? And how can governments and corporations actually align their interests when it comes to AI security?
Yeah, so very good questions, all very tough questions as well. So I will hone into the FMF, the Frontier Model Forum question and DARPA. The one difference that I want to highlight between the two is with FMF, this is an industry collaboration body. So Microsoft, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google put heads together and said, let's create this fora where we can advance research on frontier AI, which is AI that has the most advanced capabilities, right? Let's advance research. Let's have dialogue. Let's develop principles, guidance. Let's foster collaboration and do some information sharing around this. And this is a very common mechanism that a lot of different industries, not just the tech industry, use to help to build either capacity or to break ground on complex issues that need solutions. And one of the things that these types of organizations are pretty good at is mobilizing to get out those first principles or guidances or best practices documents that takes quite some time to do on the standard side. As you know, standards are quite different from, guidance documents, but they do take some time and there's a lot of time investment. It takes time to develop standards. And so these types of resources coming out from fora or groups like the FMF are very important, especially to hold everyone over while we have more mature standards down the road. Now with DARPA is a government-led initiative, right? DARPA is the U.S. agency that I believe their mission is around technological innovation for the national security of the United States. And so this is really a hacking competition where they invite the brightest minds to come in, hack away, find those breakthroughs that we're looking for in software security. And so the DARPA Cybersecurity Challenge, I believe, was kicked off, I think the first one sometime in 2013. And with the emergence of AI sort of now in the Gen AI in the mainstream, they decided to build on the success of those competitions and conduct one for AI, which I believe will be concluding at DEF CON this year. And so these are very powerful mechanisms to advance research. These are very powerful mechanisms for starting the conversation. And collaboration is always the goal here. Mind you, FMF has grown. There are more members now that have joined, including Meta. With DARPA, it's pretty open and it's made the best man win. I believe the top prize winner is $4 million. And so this is a way to incentivize that kind of innovation. And so they're pretty crucial types of mechanisms to use to advance research.
I really like the ideas. I know you've spoken a lot about global collaboration and cooperation, and you've said a lot of great stuff, right? And for a lot of it is great on paper and sometimes in practice, like you just shared some fantastic examples of. But in a world where, largely speaking, every country plays by different rules, what do you see as the biggest hurdles to making international collaboration a reality?
When it comes to AI at the intersection of cybersecurity policy, the biggest hurdles I see are around the differing interests of different governments worldwide. There has to be a very high degree of trust amongst the nations, which we know there are several driving forces that can either strengthen or weaken this, including geopolitical type issues. When you have differing interests and you're looking to advance your own interests, that could be a challenge in collaboration. I always say that cybersecurity is a team sport, right? It's we swim together or we sink together. When you add AI into the equation here, AI at the intersection of cybersecurity, right now it feels as if it's more of a marathon where there's one winner trying to win the race as opposed to a team sport. Another hurdle that I see is around the regulatory divergence, which I had spoken to earlier. With regulatory divergence, it's also an outcome of nations just having different approaches and different interests. And that could also hinder collaboration, because if one country decides that a market-driven approach is what's best for me, and another is more focused on maybe more regulation as opposed to none, how do you meet in the middle, right? And so I think there's a couple of hurdles that I see for collaboration. And then last but not the least, there's always the question around accountability, which goes back to the issue of trust, right? So if you have governments come together and make a pledge, right, to do something, how do you really ensure accountability that after the pledge is made, that it's actually being followed through? And so that's where trust is really important.
I couldn't say that any better than you have. So thank you so much for really leading on to the next conversation I was going to bring to the table. More about that divergence you spoke about. So I want us to talk more about that. I've seen, and much like you as well, several AI security initiatives launching, most of them simultaneously. For example, from Japanese government to the US Treasury to the NSA, for example. Are we moving toward regulatory alignment, or are we just setting the stage for even more fragmented regulation? And what's your advice for companies trying to navigate these varied landscapes? Just to add to that question, maybe some sort of a backdrop, I was at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting on cybersecurity in Geneva last year. And one of the biggest conversations that was happening on the sidelines and on the main stage there was security leaders and operators, like you would call them, just talking about how very fragmented regulation is really hampering on their work and it's so difficult to navigate. So this question is basically with that backdrop, but more with an AI lens as well to these things. How would you advise companies trying to navigate these varied landscapes, to go around it? And then what are we seeing? Would there be some point a reduction to this fragmented regulation? Will make some sort of progress at some point?
Very good questions. I think what you're referring to is regulatory harmonization. Industry has been advocating for regulatory harmonization domestically here in the US, and they have been advocating for regulatory harmonization globally as well. So essentially, for example, let's use cybersecurity incident reporting regimes. There are so many worldwide. And an example of divergence is, for example, one country says that as soon as you know that you have a cyber incident, you should report within 72 hours. But then you have another country that says report within 6 hours. If you're a company that operates in those two countries, and most big corporations, as you know, are global companies, how do you deal with this type of divergence? And I just used two countries as an example. So imagine if you're operating in, 10 countries or more that have different requirements. The concern here is moving away from focusing on security and now focusing on compliance and trying to check off the list and make sure that you get all this reporting done instead of making sure you're focusing on dealing with the incident that's happening at that time.
True.
So now that I set the stage on that divergence, where are we currently? In the cybersecurity landscape, it's quite fragmented, and I could talk 1 hour on the different ways that it's fragmented. It's not only fragmented by country. I'll use the US as an example. It's fragmented here even by sectors, right? There's no all-up cybersecurity legislation, for example, in the US. The EU has a bit of a different type of approach there. They do have the NIS2, which is all encompassing, but they also have other types of cybersecurity regulation that are focusing on other aspects. So, for example, like the Cybersecurity Resilience Act, which is one of the landmark legislations around product security. And so when you now bring in the AI piece, the concern was if we haven't harmonized cybersecurity legislation, and then we're now adding this AI piece to it, there was a lot of anxiety as to how that will work with security. But then there was the AI safety piece coming in. A lot of folks were advocating and saying, we have an opportunity with AI not to repeat cybersecurity policy or cybersecurity regulation 2.0. Now, where are we heading? I don't know. We might not have regulation, right? And then we wouldn't be talking about regulation harmonization, right? I kid because of the trends towards deregulation in some parts of the world. I do think that we will still have some kind of regulation, maybe just not as much as we've seen in the past. And so in terms of alignment, I think the focus shouldn't necessarily be on no regulation or regulate everything. I think the focus should be what do we need to do to advance security and ensuring that approaches align. And one of the fundamental ways to align approaches, so a regulation says pretty much you have to do X. But then how do you implement those regulations? That's where you look to standards, right? And using standards that are risk-based, that are flexible and agile, give you that right foundation that you need to build upon. ISO IAC standards are example of risk-based, outcomes-focused based standards. And for example, a lot of the NIST standards, like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So when you use these types of standards, they can talk to each other, right? They're interoperable, as they say. There's some alignment. And even as different countries are putting out regulations or policies or guidances or best practices, if they build off these types of international risk-based, flexible style standards, what happens is it fosters innovation because it can be tailor-made to the country's needs, to that regulation's needs, and even with sectors, right? Especially with like critical infrastructure sectors. What the chemical sector needs might not be what the education sector needs, and what the education sector needs may not be what the water sector needs. But if they use sort of this foundational approach of using these international standards that are risk-based, they can tailor make those standards to fit their scenarios for that particular sector, for the particular country, or sometimes for the particular topic. So for example, right now, NIST just put out a request for information in creating an AI profile using the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so these types of risk-based standards like ISO IAC and NIST CSF, they are agile in a way that you can tailor make them to fit a technology, you can tailor make them to fit a particular scenario that you need, or even a sector. And another example I'll give you here, for example, in United States, or maybe even globally, but the finance sector actually took the NIST cybersecurity framework and made a version to speak to the risk management needs of the finance sector, and have even used it as a tool to also help keep themselves on top of their very heavily regulated industry where they had so many different compliance regimes. The point I'm trying to get across here is that it doesn't necessarily have to just be one thing. It's the approach, the foundation, and risk-based standards like ISO, IC, and NIST allow for that adaptability, but it also allows for the interoperability where a company in the UK can sell to a company in the EU and still be able to use attestations or certifications that are based on these risk-based flexible style standards, and they can talk to each other. And ultimately, when we're all speaking a similar language or using a similar approach, we can information share better and we can build upon that and actually increase security.
I agree a lot with a lot of what you said. And really just talking about standards, I really like that you flagged that, because I wanted to also ask about the ISO standards, especially the ISO
ISO
IC,
IC.
yeah, the 42001. It's basically just advocating for responsible AI practices. But we know that compliance doesn't always equate to true security. How can we measure the real impact of AI security certifications, and what can be done to give them more strength?
Right. So I think the goal is not to measure the impact of certifications, right? These certifications are tools for attestation. These certifications are tools to attest and provide stakeholders the assurance that you are doing certain types of security practices and you're putting certain types of security safeguards. With the ISO 42001, for example, the idea here is not to say here are a checklist of requirements, check, 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 and get a certification, and then that's it. The idea here is to provide a way for organizations to think through establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continuously improving the AI systems in an organization. So it's supposed to foster certain types of behaviors in a risk-based way to adapt flexibly and do the proper risk assessments and put the right mitigations in place as you are introducing AI systems in your environment.
I mean, that's a fantastic way to put it. And I really liked how you spoke about standards there and what they really are designed for. So I just really want to follow that question up by asking you about AI in general, right? You and I know AI has been in use in cybersecurity field for many years. So what's all the hype about it now, and especially in the context of security solutions? What exactly is new?
Yes, you are absolutely right. I've heard so many security professionals say AI has been around for 20 years. Machine learning has been around for 20 years. What is all the hype about? I think the hype, especially after ChatGPT made the scene in 2022, the hype is around the advancements in Gen AI, the ability to be able to scale things, the efficiency that it brings, and the speed. When you think about security teams, the idea that you can use Gen AI to sift through threat intel much faster is definitely appealing. We have talked about cybersecurity workforce for a very long time in the policy space, as well as other areas of cybersecurity. We've talked about the cybersecurity workforce shortage. We've talked about cybersecurity professionals burnout. We've talked about not being able to respond fast enough to incidents, right? And there's also that dilemma where the attacker needs to get it right just once and they're in, but the defender needs to be right every single time. It's almost like the scales are tipped in the favor of the adversary, like they have the advantage. And so the promise of being able to use Gen AI solutions, for example, to be able to get faster, to scale a cyber defender's expertise or what they're capable of doing to a larger scale, and the efficiency that comes with that is what the hype is about. Also, there are, advancements in compute and what that would mean for advancements in AI. And then there's the agentic AI that's coming on the scene. We're starting to see an introduction of this into products. And the idea here is that you have an AI agent that is helping you to write faster, execute tasks faster. And the goal would be AI agents that are not only supporting you in tasks, but that can work with you like a team. So imagine a small two-man security team having a team of AI agents that can have them investigate incidents, for example. So when you think about that, the scale, as they say, AI is a force multiplier. So the Gen AI and the agentic AI's ability to be able to really add that force multiplier to scale and become faster and add efficiency, perhaps that asymmetric advantage for the cyber defender may be achieved.
Awesome. And I really want to take you back to the earlier conversation I told you to hold your thoughts about, which was on race. And you mentioned earlier on the work you're doing in that framework. And I know race is all about building trust in AI security. But in a world where governments, corporations, and the public often clash, how effective do you think race will be in turning broad ethical guidelines into real actionable AI security regulations?
Great question. And so I don't know if we actually mentioned what RAISE means. RAISE is a roundtable on AI security and ethics. And I think I mentioned this earlier that it's led by Unidare in collaboration with Microsoft. And so big up to some of my colleagues, which are part of our cybersecurity policy and diplomacy team that have worked very hard on the RAISE initiative. And the goal here, as you mentioned, in regarding to trust, is we have to remember that trust is a process. Trust is not a one-time achievement. And so the goal is not about setting regulations, but the idea for this roundtable was to create a safe space where differences can be discussed, where you can have open dialogue, where we can discuss real use cases and examples happening around the world on these issues and see where governments, stakeholders can align to develop some kind of norms around these things. And I know you asked around how can we get actionable things out of race. And so that would be the goal would be, or the process is to really have this frank dialogue, respecting differences, knowing that stakeholders all have different, well, not all, but stakeholders have differing interests. And how can we turn these broad type of principles into actionable practices?
Awesome. And that brings me to something your CEO recently published. Microsoft CEO recently announced the quantum computing breakthrough via X. And I'd like to read the section of his tweet that actually blew my mind away. It goes thus: Imagine a chip that can fit in the palm of your hand, yet is capable of solving problems that even all the computers on Earth today combined could not. That for me was very mind blowing. So I want us to talk about that from the context of how you think quantum computing will have an impact on the intersection of AI and cybersecurity in the near future.
Yes, it's a really exciting time that we live in, right? We've got to experience this explosive advancement in AI and all the promises that it offers to improve the human condition. And then now there's this breakthrough that's being announced, right? There's the Majora 1 chip, which is a breakthrough in quantum computing. And I really like that you flagged how powerful that is. That one chip that fits in the palm of your hand, when that's achievable, will be more impactful than what all the computers on Earth today can accomplish. So when you think about that kind of computational power and what that could do, I do believe that AI and quantum computing will be used together. We understand that this type of breakthrough for quantum computing will be used to realize more breakthroughs in areas in material science, so your physics and engineering, as well as in medicines. And one area that we think will be impactful as it comes to AI, perhaps it could be used to create synthetic data to train AI models, right? And so when you think of how powerful AI is and what the promises are for medicine and just improving the human condition, and then you think about having this kind of really, really powerful computer with so much, speed, but not only speed, but capability. And so it's so interesting that when you think about quantum computing and you compare it to classical computing, with classical computing, the way you can look at it, it uses bits, right? But with quantum computing, it uses qubits. So it's almost like looking at a coin that has heads or tails. With a quantum computer, it's almost like you can see the heads and tails at the same time, as opposed to only seeing heads or tails. And so that kind of power to be able to solve complex issues, to me, is mind blowing, and what that would mean for cybersecurity. But with AI, right, there are two sort of divergent trends, right? There's the trend where AI can be used to give the cyber defendant an asymmetric advantage. But then there's the other aspect where the adversary is also keenly looking for ways to use the technology or this innovation for nefarious means. And so with quantum computing, even outside this breakthrough, there are initiatives currently going on in the US government around post-quantum cryptography. So that's transitioning us from where we are today to cryptographic standards that can withstand when there's a quantum computer online, right? Mm-hmm. And so the US has approached things from the angle of ensuring that the post-quantum cryptographic standards are identified, and that was finalized by NIST last year. Those are actually algorithms that can withstand a quantum computer's capability to crack today's encryption, right? And I think, Confidence, you and I have talked about this before, that you have threat actors today that are harvesting data, encrypted data, and are sitting on this data for the day that everything will be decrypted with a quantum computer. And, some of it is hype that it won't just happen automatically overnight, but post-quantum cryptographic transitions do need to kick off, and they have kicked off in the US. I know that in the EU, they are looking to put some kind of, plans in motion about having a holistic post-quantum cryptography plan. So governments are thinking about this, but I am curious, based on the news that was just announced by Microsoft about the Majora 1 chip 2 days ago, I am curious to see how that also unfolds. As we know now, a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is probably going to be here sooner than we thought.
Very near. But I also want you to just close your eyes for a moment and imagine you're sitting down with world leaders at the next Global AI Security Summit. What's the one policy you would insist they implement immediately?
So we all saw the news about the open source model, DeepSeek. Open source software has always been top of mind, but I think with the emergence of DeepSeek, it's really top of mind right now. So I would be very interested in exploring how to balance AI innovation, open source models, and security. As you know, Microsoft has been a big proponent of the open source community, obviously for its benefits around community-driven innovation. But we know that that same community-driven structure it does not have one authority that's looking over the quality or the maintenance of it. And so attackers can go into some of these libraries and start projects of their own and inject malware into some of the open source software. And so the concerns around open source models could be the same thing, right? Can attackers go into Hugging Face, for example, and work on a pre-trained model that's designed to do nefarious purposes, embedding malware or other kinds of, attack vectors in it? And so how do we balance this sort of interplay between AI innovation, open source, and security? And then, you mentioned some of Satya's comments. And so thinking about this too, I would mention Satya's mention of the Jevons paradox, right? The more efficiency leads to more consumption. And so I think that's very much tied into how we proceed, with open source models. Microsoft has open source models like our 5.3 family, for example. And so I really think that this is a really interesting space. It's very top of mind because of what DeepSeek has done. And that would be the one area that I'd like to have more dialogue around and build either guidelines, best practices, frameworks around how we could advance the work around open source AI models.
Awesome. But before we round up, I have noticed that you love mentoring the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. So if one of such prospective mentees is watching this interview and has an interest in pursuing a career in AI governance, what would be your advice to them? Is this a promising path? And what skills would they need? If you have any suggestions on how they can gain these required skills, please add.
Absolutely. I think the number one skill, and it's no different from the advice that I gave for just generally entering the cybersecurity field, is you need to have a curious mind and you need to have an approach for problem solving. Because as you know, Confidence, every day there is a new complex issue, one that you've never heard. It's a very exciting space. So you do need to have that level of curiosity, problem solve. I am a big proponent of certifications. That's how I actually pivoted into cybersecurity from a non-cybersecurity field, was by picking up my CISA certification and saying, I know nothing about cybersecurity, but I'm going to learn it. So I'm a big proponent of cybersecurity, big proponent of education. I went back for my master's when I really didn't need one. And I had two very young children. My husband was wrapping up with his master's, but that's how important it was for me to get my master's in engineering, cybersecurity compliance and policy. And so I would say be curious, problem solve, go to school. If you can't, get your certifications, and then find ways to get hands-on experience, whether it's a small lab in your home, whether it's, getting an internship somewhere, and network. Ask questions. If you don't have a mentor, everyone that you meet in the space during a networking event is a mentor. I didn't have mentors for a very long time, but I treated every interaction as a mentoring experience. And so I would advise young incoming cybersecurity professionals to do the same.
Awesome. So lastly, give us 3 words that describe how you feel about how AI is reshaping cyber landscape.
Fast.
Okay.
Exciting.
Okay.
Challenging.
Oh, fast, excited, challenging. Okay. That's like FEC. FEC.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much, Patricia, for having this insightful conversation with us at AI Cyber Magazine. We can't wait for the rest of the world to see this, and we're going to drop a lot of the resources you spoke about in the show notes. So definitely check out the show notes and then see a lot of the resources you spoke about. But thank you so much, Patricia, for giving us your time.
Confidence, it was my pleasure to be here. You are a change maker, and I could not be more proud to be part of this interview today. Please reach out anytime, and I look forward to seeing you maybe at RSA.
Yeah, at RSA again. Thank you so much.
Alicia Keys, the real one, will not be there this time.